Okay.
Okay, sir. Because
So,
last week you don't meet, so we are missing you, sir, class.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. So we are going to start our class again. Last week, for the midterm test, we had to skip the class, and I think it was quite okay. Those participating the midterm test, they have done quite well, and those who are supposed to submit their essays, the shorter one, I think all of you have submitted your essays. So gradually I am going through all these documents. So today we will be having our class on the arising of diverse Buddhist sects, Buddhist schools in India around the time of King Ashoka. We will also be focusing on King Ashoka's specific contribution, especially with regard to the establishment of Dhamma throughout the country, and the establishment of so many Chaitiyas, and also his rock edicts that he has established in different parts of India, covering almost the entire country. We will be looking at some of these rock edicts as well. Let me share my screen first. Can you all hear my voice clearly?
Yes, teacher.
Yes, teacher. Can hear.
Okay. This is small, right? Oh, yeah. Okay. No sound? Why no sound?
I can hear you.
You're having difficulties with your submission of short essay still? You are supposed to submit it last week. But as soon as possible, if you can submit your essay, that would be good. Because I think you have to, of course, for this course, you have to write another essay, the longer one. And you also have to prepare a presentation, which will be done by the end of the course, probably in last 1 or 2 lectures. And for other courses as well, I guess that you have to write essays. So it is better if you can finish your essay sooner, the shorter one, and then if you submit it to me, that would be good. But all of you actually are expected to submit your shorter essay last week, right? Last Tuesday. Mr. Sonam says he cannot hear the voice. I'm not sure. I think no problem for others.
We can hear well, teacher.
Yes, Venerable. Okay, we can begin our class. So we'll be discussing about the popularization of Buddhism and arising of diverse Buddhist sects in India. Now, when we talk about the contribution made by, the kings of Maurya Empire, especially Maurya dynasty, the most contribution that was made for the propagation of Buddhism is by King Asoka. Is there any problem with sound or visual? Is anyone having any problem with regard to sound?
No, everything is fine. Everything is
No,
fine.
teacher. You are not.
Everything is going on fine, teacher.
Okay, yeah. So the most contribution made by particularly King Asoka, right? So as you can see from this map that in the Maurya Empire, especially in the time of Asoka, he conquered most part of India. So he has been ruling this entire country. Therefore, he had this opportunity to do whatever he liked to do. And as you all know, we have been discussing last week before last, in our last class, that he was converted to Buddhism. So he made a great support for the propagation of Buddhism. Asoka's devotion for the Buddha, this is, I think, very significant to mention here. When he was converted to Buddha's teaching, he decided to visit these 4 holy places. For the Buddhist especially, these are regarded as holy places. You'd find that people from all around the world, and from time to time, they go to visit these holy places in India. So these 4 holy places represent the place of Buddha's birth, where the Buddha was born, that is Lumbini. And then Buddha Gaya or Bodh Gaya is a place where the Buddha attained enlightenment. And Sarnath is the place where he provided his first teaching. And then Kushinara is the place where the Buddha attained Parinibbana. So the king Asoka decided to visit these places, and after visiting these places, he had even more devotion and respect for the Buddha and his Dhamma. And in fact, he made this announcement that if somebody is really following the teaching of the Buddha, he should visit these places to strengthen his devotion and his faith in the Buddha and in the teachings of the Buddha. This is giving some trouble, I think. What is the matter? I cannot change the slide. So throughout the country, he erected a number of rock edicts containing different types of messages, messages of the Buddha and his own understanding of the teaching, and how he wants to rule the country, how he wants the people in the country to behave, and carry out their duties and responsibilities. So he has erected a number of rock edicts. The later scholars who are interested in finding out the messages of these rock edicts, they have collected all these rock edicts, picture of these rock edicts, studied them, and then came up with the message that Asoka conveyed in his rock edicts. As far as I remember, I have provided you a document containing translation of Asoka's rock edicts. I think the one that I have sent to you is by Professor Romila Thapar, I guess. So that contains his messages as he presented them in the rock edicts. So basically, you can say that these rock edicts contain message of the Buddha's teaching, message on politics and economic condition of the time, and in general, the total socio-political condition, and Asoka's view of an ideal society and country. Now, these are the places where all these rock edicts have been found. So there are different types of rock edicts. So they are divided in terms of major rock edicts, pillar edicts, minor rock edicts. As you can see, these are the places covering, you see, as far as Gandhara, Kashmir, that area in the north, and in the south, as far as almost, southern India, and then covering Bengal, I think even part of Myanmar, present-day Myanmar, and this side, Girnar. And these edicts, rock edicts, have been written or inscribed in Prakrit or Brahmi script. Now, if you look at this writings, you'd find that some are of the opinion that they are proto Pali, they are not yet Pali. So we talk about Pali being the original language in which the Buddha spoke, and he spread his message. But there are controversies with regard to this, because all this information that we have with regard to the councils, or with regard to Buddha's existence, his teachings, and so on, mainly from the time of King Asoka, from his edicts and so on. So we find that the writing and the language that he used in his time is considered as a kind of proto-Pali, because when you look at the Pali and his message, you'd find some differences. They are not completely Pali. So I would show you some of the inscriptions later on, as they have been deciphered by different scholars. So these are some pictures of the edicts. Yeah, so transcripts of inscriptions. So this is how they came up with from these messages. Of course, they used this kind of symbols, or you can say alphabets or letters, to convey the message, to write the message. And when they are written in Roman script, you'd find something like this. So in some cases, part of these messages are lost. For example, if you look at this sentence here, Ayang Dharma Lipi, certain part is omitted. Devanam Priyasa, then omitted again. In the complete sentence, you'd find Yam Dhamma Lipi Kepi na Galasi Pavatasi Devanam Piena Piadasina. So this is how they have, recovered the message. So it seems that similar kind of message have been, inscribed in different places. So it is not that just one particular message have been, put just in one particular place. It has been, put in different places. So they have collected all these variations, and then they try to understand exactly what the inscription meant. This is another example here, edict number 14, Aya Dhamma Lipi, Dhamma Lipi. It is, it doesn't say Dhamma Lipi, Dhamma Lipi, Devanam Priyena Pisina Ranyena Likapita. Right? So it seems to suggest that this Dharma Lipi, this writing, this inscription has been written by this king called Devanam Piya Dasina. Devanam Piya Dasina. So it seems that this was a name that is given to him. That was, when Asoka was referred to, he was not just referred to by the name Asoka, but Devanam Piya Dasina or Devanam Piya Tissa. And here you have another inscription. Devanam Piyo Hevam Aha Satilekani Aditiyani Sangvachalani Upasake Sumi Nacha Buddhang Palakante. So you have 8 variations of this. Okay, now this is a picture of modern time that shows that this is how these inscriptions have been composed. So basically you would find 3 different types of edicts: major rock edicts, minor rock edicts, and pillar rock edicts. And the messages that they bear shows his regrets for past misdeeds, his expression of conquest by teaching, propagation of true teaching, dharma, promotion of welfare of the people, and endorsement of religious tolerance and harmony. So we will be looking at some of his messages now, but you can go through the entire document that I sent to you to have a clearer understanding of Asoka's messages as found in these inscriptions. Regrets for past misdeeds. So you'd find this message written in the rock edict number 13, where Asoka conveyed his regrets for his misdeeds, including the war that he carried out, and where a lot of people died. So when he became a Buddhist, he was regretting for his misdeeds, his actions that caused lives of a lot of people. So it says Kalinga was conquered by King Asoka after he had been crowned for 8 years. 150,000 persons were then carried away captive. 100,000 were there slain, and many times that number perished. Directly after the annexation of Kalinga, began King Asoka's zealous protection of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. His love of that law and his giving instruction in that law. Thus arose King Asoka's remorse for having conquered Kalinga, because the conquest of a country previously unconquered involves the slaughter, death, and carrying away of people as captives. This is a matter of profound sorrow and regret to His Majesty. So the king was expressing his regrets in this message. Further, he's saying, there is, however, further reason for King Asoka feeling still more regret, inasmuch as in such a country dwell priests, men of various denominations, and householders, upon whom is laid the duty of listening attentively to superiors, to father and mother, and to teachers, and of proper treatment of friends, acquaintances, comrades, relatives, slaves, and servants, with enduring concern. To such people in a country at war befalls violence or slaughter, or separation from their loved ones, or misfortune befalls the friends, acquaintances, comrades, and relatives of those who are themselves well protected while their affection is undiminished. Thus for them also this is a mode of violence, and the share of this that falls on all men is matter of regret to King Asoka. So it seems like he was really, pointing out all kinds of misdeeds that he, did, and especially after the war, what happened in the country. When he was reflecting on that, he was really very sad thinking about it, and he wanted people to know that he's regretting for his misdeeds. And then once he turned towards the Dhamma, he was trying every way to rule the country according to the Dhamma. So this message can be found in Rock Edict 13 again. He says, thus of all the people who were slain, done to death, or carried away captive in Kalinga, if the 100th or the 1000th part were to suffer again the same fate, it would now be matter of regret to King Asoka. Moreover, should anyone do him wrong, that too must be borne with by His Majesty, if it can possibly be borne with. Even upon the native people of the forest in his dominions, King Asoka looks kindly and he seeks their conversion. For if he did not, repentance would come to His Majesty. They are bidden to turn from evil ways, that they be not chastised. For King Asoka desires that all animate things should have security, self-control, peace of mind, and joyousness. And this is the highest form of conquest. In the opinion of King Asoka, the conquest by teaching the Dharma, and this again has been achieved by His Majesty, both in his own dominions and in all the neighboring realms as far as 1,500 kilometers. And for this purpose has this pious edict been written, in order that my sons and descendants should not regard it as their duty to achieve a new conquest. If by chance they become engaged in a conquest by arms, they should take pleasure in patience and gentleness, and regard the conquest won by the Dharma as the only true conquest. So he was emphasizing here a few qualities. First of all, he is of course regretting, and then he's emphasizing on these few qualities. For example, all animate things should have security. So that corresponds to the first precept, first of the 5 precepts that you can find in Buddhism, Panati Pata Veramani Sikkapadam, right? So Panati Pata says that, you should respect life. You should take care of lives, right? You should not harm any living things. Self-control. is another quality that he was emphasizing in this edict. So self-control could be understood as sangbara, right? Self-control, restraint of indriyas, peace of mind and joyousness. And this is said to be the highest form of conquest. And in his words, the conquest by teaching the Dhamma. So I think this is, this expression is I don't exactly remember, but it is something like, with the Dhamma or righteousness, one should rule the country. Similar message can be found in some of the suttas, for example, Kutadanta Sutta and Sihananda Sutta, where you have descriptions of kings ruling the country, and because of not following the Dhamma, there are diverse problems, social and political problems arising, and then the spiritual friends suggest the king to rule the country according to the Dhamma. So I think that somehow king was convinced by this message, and then he was trying to propagate this message in his country. Furthermore, he is saying that there is no gift like the giving of the Dhamma, friendship in Dharma, liberality in Dharma, association in Dharma. Herein does it consist in proper treatment of slaves and servants, listening attentively to father and mother, gifts to friends, relatives, priests, and ascetics, abstaining from slaughter of animals. This you can find in Rock Edict number 11. Now this shows that if you look at the Sigalovada Sutta, there are 6 directions that are mentioned, right? One should regard to one's parents, one's friends, one's teachers, one's relatives, and so on. But the first statement, there is no gift like the giving of the Dhamma. Normally we find this expression, when the monastic member provide teaching to give importance to the messages of the Dhamma, Buddha's messages. It says, Dhamma Danam Sabba Danam Jinati, right? The gift of Dhamma is superior to all kinds of gifts. Friendship in Dharma, liberality in Dharma, association in Dharma. So I think you can take this word Dharma as law, as truth, as representing teachings of the Buddha. So it seems like he's, asking all the people to be, familiar with the Dhamma and to faithfully follow the teachings of the Buddha. Father and mother must be obeyed. Similarly, respect for living creatures must be firmly established. Truth must be spoken. These are the virtues of the Dharma which must be practiced. Similarly, the teacher must be reverenced by the people and proper courtesy must be shown to relatives. Again, this shows the message that we find in the Sigalovada Sutta. Further, he says the Dharma is excellent, but wherein consists the Dharma? In these things: little impiety, many good deeds, compassion, liberality, truthfulness, and purity. My ministers of the Dharma are engaged in the prevention of wrongful imprisonment or chastisement, to criticize or punish severely, in the work of removing hindrances to the release from prison and helping cases where a man has a large family, has been smitten to affect sharply with great feeling by calamity, or is advanced in years. So this tells us that Asoka not just was spreading the messages of Dharma, but he, organized a kind of community, groups of people called ministers of Dharma, Dhamma Manta, to take care of religious affairs. So from the description of especially the third council in the Mahavamsa and in some other places, you would find that he would ask all these ministers to go to different directions and to look after this, dharma activities, if they are properly done or not. But these dharma ministers, they were not spiritual leaders, or they were not monks. In the edicts, the dharma was defined in a variety of ways as goodness, sadhu, few patience, alpasrava, many good acts, bahukalyana, affection, daya, alms giving, dana, truth, satya, and purity of action, saucha. The realization of dharma pratipatti, was said to consist of affection, generosity in giving, truth, purity, gentleness, mardava, and goodness. If a person engaged in alms giving but had not learned to control his senses, sangyama, or lacked gratitude, kritajñata, or was without steadfast sincerity, dhrida bhakita, he was a base person, a lowly person. Ashoka warned that brutality, inhumanity, anger, pride, and jealousy all led to even more defilements. Good is not easy to accomplish. Anyone just beginning to do good will find it difficult, he stated. But then Ashoka noted that he had accomplished many good deeds. Yeah, so these are the messages with regard to his understanding of Dharma and how he wants people to understand and respect the Dhamma and live their life accordingly. Now here you have messages for the welfare of people. And he's saying, all men are my children. Just as in regard to my own children, I desire that they may be provided with all kinds of welfare and happiness in this world and in the next. The same I desire also in regard to all men. Work I must for the welfare of all, and the root of the matter is in effort and the dispatch of business, for nothing is more efficacious producing a desired effect to secure the welfare of all. And for what do I toil? For no other end than this, that I may discharge my debt to animate beings. On the roads, I have had banyan trees planted to give shade for animals and men. I have had groves of mango trees planted. At every half mile, I have had wells dug, rest houses have been built, and numerous watering places have been provided by me here and there for the enjoyment of man and beast. Everywhere King Asoka has made arrangement for two kinds of medical treatment, namely medical treatment for men and medical treatment for animals. So it seems like not just for the people in the country that he was desiring happiness and goodness, even for the animals as well. With regard to religious tolerance, as we can understand, the entire country was not, following Buddha's teaching. There were so many different schools of thoughts that have been existing at the same time, right? And king was tolerant to all. He was allowing every faith to, carry on their practice without any problems. So he was supporting all different schools. And this is his message with regard to religious tolerance that can be found in Rocket 8, number 12. A man must not do reverence to his own sect or disparage that of another sect without reason. Depreciation, a decrease or loss in value, should be for specific reason only, because the sects of other people all deserve reverence for one reason or another. By thus acting, a man exalts his own sect and at the same time does services to the sects of other people. By acting contrariwise, a man hurts his own sect and does disservice to the sects of other people. King Asoka does reverence to men of all sects, whether ascetics or householders, by gifts and various forms of reverence. Okay, so what he's saying that in all kinds of faith, there are something good. You look at that goodness, right? Rather than just being engaged in criticism and, in conflict, look at the goodness in all different faiths and, have respect for other faiths as well. And by doing that, you are not just, respecting other faiths only, you are actually respecting your own faith as well. So that is the message that he wanted to give in this edict. Although Asoka had converted to Buddhism, he treated other religions fairly. Rock Edict 12 states that he gave alms and honored both members of religious orders and the laity of all religious groups. In Rock Edict 7, he declared that he wished members of all religions to live everywhere in his kingdom. In Pillar Edict 7, Asoka noted that he had appointed ministers of Dhamma to be responsible for affairs related to the Buddhist order. Other ministers of Dhamma were responsible for the affairs of Brahmans, Ajivakas, or Jainas. His specific support for Buddhist order. So even though he was, supporting to all different religious faiths, he was particularly, taking care of Buddhist faiths. Asoka was fair in his treatment of all religions, but he was particularly devoted to Buddhism, as is illustrated by the inscriptions concerning his own life. Asoka converted to Buddhism around the 7th year of his reign. According to the minor rock edict from Rupnath, for the next 2 years, he was not very devout in his practice, but then for a period of more than a year, he drew near to the order, Sangaha Upetaha, and practiced assiduously. The phrase drew near to the order probably indicated that Asoka was affiliated with the Buddhist order and performed the same practices as a monk. According to Rock Edict 8, Asoka went to Sambodhi, probably the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. In the 10th year of his reign, the Nigali Sagar Pillar Edict recorded that in the 14th year of his reign, Asoka had a stupa dedicated to the first Buddha Kona Kamana, repaired and then personally made offerings at it. The Lumbini Pillar Edict recorded that sometime after the 20th year of his reign, Asoka traveled to the Buddha's birthplace and personally made offerings there. He then had a stone pillar set up and reduced the taxes of the people in that area. The edicts at Sanchi, Sarna, and Kaushambi all warned against schisms in the order and declared that many monk or nun who tried to cause a schism would be defrocked. Warnings against schisms were included in the minor rock edicts as well. If you remember, we discussed it earlier that when he was regretting about his past misdeeds, especially as far as I remember, I think when, firstly after the war, and then secondly, when he asked one of his minister to, go to Asoka Rama to see if, the activities, the monastic activities have been carried out properly. And then a certain monks, confronted the minister, and the minister killed some of the monks, and this was reported to King Asoka, and he was very sad to hear that. Then later on, he spent some times in a monastery, close to a monastery, having good guidance and teachings from a certain monks, most probably Venerable Mungaliputta Tisatera, right? Before deciding to, purify the sasana and holding the council. So here, you'd see that this phrase is given importance: draw near to the order. And then in the Bhairata edict, Asoka paid honor to the order and then declared that he respected Gaurava and put his faith, prasada, in the three jewels. He then stated that all of the Buddha's teachings were good, but that certain doctrines, Dharma Prayaya, were particularly useful in ensuring that Buddhism would endure for a long time. The names of the following 7 texts were then listed. So we find names of this text in his edicts. The first is called Vinaya Samukasa, the superior teaching of the Vinaya. Aliyavasani, noble lineage. So Aliya means Arya, right? Arya. Anagata Bhayani, dangers of the future. Munigatha, verses on recluses. Muneya Sute, sutra on the practice of silence. Upatissa Pasine, Upatissa's question. Laghulo Vada, that is Rahula Vada, the exhaustion to Rahula. So you'd find this text in these places, in Vinaya, Anguttara Nikaya, Sutta Nipata, in all these places. So it's, we find that this text have been particularly mentioned. And this suggests that this text have been already composed and popular in the time of Asoka. Regarding this text, number 6, Upatissa Pasine, according to this source, it is from Sutta Nipata, but there are different opinions with regard to this question of Upatissa. Upatissa refers to Sariputta, right? Sariputta's another name is Upatissa. So the sutta that I sent to you last time for the, especially for those who are participating in the methodology class, Ratavinita Sutta, if you remember, that sutta is also called Upatis Pasine. So some came to the conclusion that because in the sutta, it is the Sariputta who is asking questions to another monk. Okay. So it is called Ratavinita Sutta because there is a simile of Ratha found in the sutta. So that is one title. It is also known as Upatis Pasine because the questions that were asked to Venerable Punnamantaniputta are asked by Sariputta. And it is really interesting because if you talk about, for example, Vinaya or even Anagata Bhayani, all these texts are quite popular. Rahula Vada Sutta as a Gihi Vinaya, disciplinary rules for the laity, it is quite popular. But Upadis Pasine is not, it's not supposed to be very popular because it is only in this sutta that the discussion that you find are present only in that sutta, not anywhere else. Okay, so one may not think that this would be a popular text. But of course, when we talk about diverse Buddhist sects and all these schools having their own canon or own text, I think it is quite possible that this was one of the texts that was quite important for certain schools. In addition, Asoka is said to have ordered 84,000 stupas built throughout the realm and to have benefited many people. At the urging of Upagupta, Asoka embarked on a series of pilgrimages to pay homage at Buddhist sites, including Lumbini, the deer park at Saranath, Buddhagaya, and Kusinagara. At many of these sites, he had stupas constructed. Stupas were also built for two of the Buddha's most important disciples, Sariputra and Madhvalayana. Later, when the Chinese pilgrims Fa Xian and Xuanzang traveled through India, they reported that many of these stupas still remained. In more recent times, archaeologists have excavated and studied many stupas and discovered that the oldest parts of the stupas often date back to Asoka's time, indicating the accuracy of these records. 84,000 stupas. So he ordered his ministers to build 84,000 stupas throughout the country. And there is a legend with regard to the consecration of these 84,000 stupas. I think you are familiar with this story. So when the building of these stupas were completed, they needed to be consecrated, right? And the king wanted to do it on one single day, but he cannot be in all these places, right? But so the proper ceremonies have been organized, but they were worried that Mara will trouble when doing these activities of consecrating these stupas. Maras will come and make trouble. So they, all the monks were discussing how they can really handle the situation. And then they came to know about this monk called Upagupta, who was living alone somewhere. And it says that he was, I think, just like Madhvalayana, a very expert in his Iddhivida, in his psychic power. So they have decided to invite him, and he came. And then later on, when they have started the ceremony, says that there were different types of troubles that came, and Upagutta took care of these troubles with Mara. There is even this story that says that finally Upagutta was able to catch the Mara. I think here particularly it is Devaputta Mara that is being referred to. Okay, Devaputta Mara. And then when Upagutta was able to catch this Mara, he took him in some place, and then he tied him down with a it says with a rotten dog, so in some place, and Mara cannot move now, and he was screaming when Upagutta was leaving him there, saying that you are disciple of the Buddha, you must be compassionate. Why do you give me such punishment? I traveled so much. The Buddha, he never gave me any punishment. So later on he's saying that if I am able to become Buddhist, I will become a Buddha. I will never become a disciple of the Buddha. And then Upagutta says that because of me, you had a great vow. One day you would become a Buddha. Okay, so when the ceremony was over, Upagutta came back and released the Mara. So the cult of Upagutta is quite famous. As far as I know, in Myanmar, in some place in Myanmar, it is quite famous, right? Yes, and I have seen it in Bangladesh as well. So in different temples, you have a specific place. In some temples, you have a specific place for Upagutta. Normally, his house is built in a in the middle of a place surrounded by water. So he's associated with water. It seems like he's living in some sea, right? So you can look at this text if you want to know more about the legend of the cult of Upagutta by Johnstone. Probably. Yeah, there is a belief like that. From my experience, I know that even nowadays, I've seen that when people organize big ceremonies, they make a particular, offering and chanting and offering to Upagutta first, right? Yeah. In the Buddhist traditional countries, I'm not sure how popular it is in Thailand. Chan? North Thailand. In the North Thailand, they have these ceremonies.
In Laos too, teacher.
Lao too. I
We
see.
always invite first when we have ceremony, especially in the Vesantara festival.
Yeah, Vasantara festival is, I think, everywhere in Thailand. I've seen it in many places. I was not sure about the Upagutta, celebration, paying respect
No,
to.
we invite him
Hmm.
first to come and protect about the ceremony, like that.
Oh, I see. I see. You mean when you organize Vasantara, this celebration, before that, you invite Upagutta.
Yes.
And I have not seen it in Sri Lanka. I'm not sure if it is present in Sri Lanka. Maybe some of the Sri Lankan monks who are participating the class can tell us.
Yes, according to my understanding, we don't have that concept in Sri Lanka. But I have been to Myanmar. I know how they celebrate this Upagutta and Upagutta. Yeah.
And if you look at this picture, he's looking at somewhere, right? He has a bowl. Seems like he's going to take his lunch. But then he's looking at something else. What does it signify? I see. So it says that when he takes food, he looks at the sun. If it is, midday, so he has to take the food before midday. He's not interested in the camera. Yeah, so you have all these beautiful legends and stories in Buddhist tradition. So, I see. I see. Which grammar book? Which grammar book? Ah, I see. Okay. I'm not sure about this this thing. Could be, but Buddha, I don't know. In the Theravada tradition, normally there are these three types of Buddhas, right? Samma Sambuddha, Pacceka Buddha, and then Savaka Buddha. So if you are talking about Savaka Buddha, I think it should be considered as a Buddha. Otherwise, I'm not sure. He's regarded as an Arahant, right? So normally in the Theravada tradition, an Arahant does not become a Samma Sambuddha, right? Once he is an Arahant, he is a liberated person already. But of course, in some other traditions, an Arahant is not regarded as a person who attained his final attainment. He still can further develop his faculties. He can still upgrade his spiritual status. So that is with regard to Asoka's understanding of Dharma, his support for Buddhism, and also to some other religious schools. Stop. What is this? Just the temple of Chiang Mai. Oh, I see. Yeah. There is, yeah, in many temples you have this statue of Upaga. You have, for example, this one. I don't know if I show you, you can see it or not. I have to close this. Okay. This is in Salaya. Salaya, I think in Salaya. I don't know if you can see this. You cannot see, I think, very clearly. This is placed very nicely because it is like he's sitting in front of a waterfall. I went to visit this place, so that time I have recorded. It was nicely done, even though the statue doesn't look very beautiful. Yeah. Anyway, so that is about Upagutta. Okay. How Asoka, consecrated this 84,000 stupas with the help of Venerable Upagutta. On good governance, Ashoka was especially diligent in his conduct of government affairs. He ordered the governmental problems be reported to him at any and all times, even when he was eating in the women's quarters or in his gardens. For Ashoka, conducting good government was the king's chief responsibility to the people of the country, benefiting all the beings of the world and then increasing those benefits was the noblest task in the world. All the king's efforts to rule were thus expressions of his desire to repay his debts to other sentient beings. He wished to make people happy in this world and help them attain heaven in their future lives. He considered all sentient beings to be his children. So this you can find in Rock Edict number 6. And then, of course, holding of the council, we have already discussed about it. This was one of the important, contributions of Asoka, holding of the third council, deciding the Buddhist text, purifying the sasana, right? And then sending missionary monks to different directions in the country. Yeah, so this you can find in the Mahavamsa. Sending of missionaries to different parts of India and beyond. So here, you see here, Thero Mugaliputto so Jinasasana Jotako Nitta Petwana Sangiting Pekamano Anagatam Sasanasa Patittanam Pachantesu Avekya Pesesi Katike Mase Tete Tere Tahing Tahing. So in the month of Katika, Katika month means in which month in English year? It says October, between October and November. Yeah. So at the end of the Sangiti, Thera Mugaliputta Tissa, with the king, decided to send different monks, different groups of monks to different directions. Terang Kashmira Gata Dharang Majjantika Mapesai. Not sure. We'll look at it. So Majjantika Thera went to Kashmir, right? Apesai Mahadeva Terang Mahisha Mandalam. So Mahadeva Thera went to Mahisha Mandalam. Vanavasing Apesesi Terang Rakita Namakam. Whenever Rakita Thera Vanavasing went to Vanavasi. Tata Aparantakam Yona Dhamma Rakita Namakam. So another monk called Yona Dhamma Rakita was sent to Aparantaka. Maharattang Mahadhamma Rakita Thera Namakam Mahadhammarakkhita Thera was sent to Maharatta. Maharakkita Theram to Yona Lokam Apesai. Yona Loka. Maharakkita. Pesai Majjimang Terang Himavanta Padesakam. Majjima Thera went to Himavanta Padesa in the country of Hima. Suvarna Bhuming Tere Dwe Sona Muttara Meva Cha. Sona and Uttara, 2 monks came to Suvarna Bhumi. Mahamahinda Terang Tang Terang Ittiyam Uttiyam Sambalang Badasalancha Sake Sadi Viharake Lanka Deepe Manuyam Hi Manuyam Jinasasanam Patittapeta Tumheti Panchatere Apesai. 5 monks came to Sri Lanka to establish the Dhamma. One is Mahamahinda Thera, that is the son of King Asoka, and then Uttiya, Sambala, Bhaddasala. Right? Together they came to Sri Lanka. So altogether how many? 9. Yeah. This is a translation from the same text in the month of Kartika. So Majjantika went to Kashmir and Gandhara. This is 1. Mahadeva to Mahishamandala, that is 2. Rakita went to Vanavasa, that is 3. Dhammarakkhita went to Aparantaka, 4. Mahadhammarakkhita went to Maharatta, 5. Maharakkita went to Yona, 6. Majjima Thera went to Himalayan country, that is 7. Sona and Uttara went to Suvarna Bhumi, 8. And Mahinda and his friends came to Sri Lanka, 9. So this is from Mahavamsa. Now, these are the directions that are, seen that these monks are said to have gone. Sri Lanka, Burma, Bactria, I don't know, this Tarim Basin, Alexandria, Athens. Of course, not sure exactly about these places. So what we know for sure is that in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Gandhara, or Central Asia, Buddhism became very strong thereafter. And if you look at here, what do you see if you compare these 2 things together? Sri Lanka is here, Myanmar, Bactria, I guess, I'm not sure, this site. What do you think Tarim Basin is?
Yeah, so if the
Somewhere.
Hansa reached Alexandria,
Mm.
this, if I can annotate, this one here is Lebanon. Oh, wait, let me use another color.
I think as far as Buddhism went, as far as Iran, I guess.
In Syria. This Antioch is Antakya, I would say, it's like Turkey during the Byzantine Empire. And, all this.
I see.
So this is our Alexandria means Egypt.
Mm.
And then Israel. So if they reach Egypt, they must have traveled through the Middle East, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt.
Yeah, but we do not have very clear record of all this, you know, traveling records, except the places where Buddhism became very strong.
Well, there is somewhere else where I read that actually before Islam, this area was mostly Hindu. They actually worshipped the cow.
I see.
Yeah, there's proof for that. And there's actually Shiva lingams all over the Middle East and even beneath the papacy in Rome. They're saying the papacy was built on a Shiva lingam temple.
I see. Yeah. So these are the 9 missionary groups sent to different directions by King Asoka. Yeah, and I wanted to mention this passage from the canonical text, especially from the Vinaya Samukasa, where we find, and we have discussed it earlier, that when we talk about sending missionary monks to different directions for the propagation of the Dhamma, we find that the Buddha himself had done it when there were 60 arahants, right? He asked them to go to different directions to preach the Dhamma. So this is the passage that shows that. So particularly when we talk about Theravada Buddhism, we find that Sona and Uttara came to Myanmar, and then Mahinda Thera came to Sri Lanka. Following Mahinda Thera, later on, his sister, Sangamitta Theri, also came to Sri Lanka, right? To establish the teaching. Okay, now that is about the missionary monks that were sent to different directions. And there is a discussion about different Buddhist schools that came up. So far we know of just these 2 main schools, right? Sthaviravada and Mahasangika. So in the time of Second Council, we find that there was already a clear division between these 2 schools in the Sangha, right? Sthaviravada and Mahasangika. And then later on, it seems that they moved to different parts of India. And then subsequently, there were many different schools that arose from these 2 schools. So this is again from Mahavagga. You find the mentions of different schools' names. From this means here it is from Mahasangika, Gokolika and Ekabyoharika schools. 2 schools. From Gokolika arose the Payati sect and the Bahulika. From these, there was Chaitya sect. So there are 6 with the Mahasangika, and yet 2 more groups parted from the followers of the Thera doctrine, the Mahishasaka and the Vajjiputtaka bhikkhus. Now this is from the Theravada. So from Mahasangika, including the Mahasangika, there was 6 schools. Mahasangika is 1, Gokolika 2, Ekabyoharika 3, Payati 4, Bahulika 5, and Chaitya 6. Right? From Theravada, there is Mahishasaka and Vajjiputtika. And they are parted from them likewise the Dhamutteriya and the Bhadrayanika bhikkhus, the Chandagarika, the Sammiti, and the Vajjiputtika bhikkhus. From the Mahishasaka bhikkhus, two groups parted, Sabbata school and the Dhammavuttika bhikkhus. From Sabbata sect arose the Kassapya, and from this arose the Sankantika bhikkhus. From this last, the Sutta sect, Suttavada or Suttantika. These are 12 together with those those of Thera doctrine. Thereto are added the 6 schools named and these together are 18. So altogether 18 schools. So names of 18 schools are mentioned in this text. Now there are different sources mentioning different numbers of schools. Okay, I'll show you some of the charts later on. Thus, in the 2nd century arose 17 schools, and other schools arose afterwards. So 12 belonging to Staviravada or Theravada, 6 belonging to Mahasangika. This is in chart from Mahasangika. You have Akabhyoharika, names sometimes differ, Gokolika, then Payantivada, Bahusutika, Chaitya. The 6. From Theravada, you have Vajjiputtika and Mahishasaka first. From Vajjiputtika, you have this 4, Dhammuttariya, Bhadrayanika, Channagarika, and Samitya. And from this one, you have Dhammavuttika, Sabbativada, then Kassapika, Sankantika, then Suttavada. So this is from Sinhalese tradition. This is from a different tradition. You have different presentation of this course. Mr. Sami is saying something?
Yeah, I said, are these schools, the one that came from Theravada, still available in the modern world, or it is in the past?
No, they are not available. We can find only the names, and in some text, for example, in the Theravada tradition, in the Abhidhamma literature, you have this text Kathavattu, where you have some of the theories and ideas or doctrines upheld by some of these schools that were refuted by Mugaliputta Tissa Thera. Okay. And similarly, in the Sarvastivada tradition, I think there is a text, Viyanakaya or something, I don't remember exactly, that provides discussions of also the theories of different schools. Okay, so in this text only you find mentioning of some of the theories of some of these schools. They don't exist at present. We will come to the discussion of that later on, why so many schools and why they don't really exist as separate schools. In fact, all these different number of schools, some say 18, some say 20 or 26, some even say over 30 schools, subsumed under 4 main schools later on that existed for quite some times. Yes, 34. So this is the maximum number that they came up with, 34 schools. Sometimes more than one names are used for a particular school. They are not actually school as such, separate school as such. Sometimes you would find that in the same area, there are people who have been living together, but having a different understanding of the Dhamma and Vinaya. Therefore, they are regarded separately. Not all the schools had their own separate monastery. but some of these schools were quite strong, so they had their own text and centers and followers. So basically, you would find this 5 list of schools names: chart of the Sariputra Paripricha Sutra, chart of Vasumitra, list of chart of Vasumitra, list of Manjushri Paripricha Sutra, and list of Bhavya. This you'd find from Andre's text, Andre Barev. He did an extensive study of all these schools. Did you try to find out his text? I sent you the name, right? I did not see actually if the book is, out as a published text. Andre Barev. This is how you read, right? I think he's a French scholar. The book was originally composed in French, I think. Later on translated into English. Spanish. So it says, yeah, the name could be Spanish, I'm not sure, but it says he's a French Buddhologist. French Buddhologist. Yeah. Okay, so I see. Good. Okay, I think it is time for the break. So after the break, we'll be discussing about the causes leading to the origination of all these different sects, and then what are the main schools that existed as a strong schools, and what are their important teachings and so on. So we can have a break now. See you after the break. Okay, so I think we can now resume our class. So we have been talking about different Buddhist schools. And the causes that contributed to the arising of all these different Buddhist sects. Yeah, so here I have noted down some of the points that could be discussed as causes contributing to the arising of all these different schools. Now, of course, all the people in all these different schools, they are all followers of the Buddha, right? So they have all agreed upon a certain important teachings, and they have been following a certain disciplinary rules as well. But they many of them had their own opinions with regard to a certain teaching and disciplinary rules, and we can see it since the time of Second Council, when Vajiputtika bhikkhus having differences of opinions with regard to Vinaya rules. And that is, of course, connected to Buddha's idea that, after his demise, the minor rules could be adjusted, right? So this option was there. So, one could interpret disciplinary rules according to their understanding. The same thing with with some of the teachings as well. So among the causes could be, want of provision for supreme headship for the sasana, right? So when the Buddha was passing away, he did not appoint any particular leader, right? He said Dhamma and Vinaya should be the teacher. So there could be kind of, wanting for some monastic members to be the head. Grouping of disciples around a noted thera. So this is connected to the ideas of the great theras that were living even in the time of the Buddha. We know that, for example, Sariputta, Moggallana, Mahakassapa, all these were great theras and they had their own followings, right? Even in the time of the first council, as soon as the council was over, we can see that Venerable Purana coming to Rajagaha with his own followers. So he's not, really following the teaching and disciplinary rules that were discussed in the first council. He said he's having his own understanding of the teaching and disciplinary rules, as he has directly heard from the Buddha, right? So, and that is the teaching and the Vinaya that he has been teaching to his students. So he already had his own group. The Bhanaka tradition and the aftermath. When we talk about the Bhanaka tradition, again, in the first council, at the end of the council, we find that certain section of the teaching were given to a certain theras or disciples of a certain great thera to preserve, to memorize and teach to their pupils, right? So that tradition continued. Elasticity of the rules of disciplines. This is connected to the interpretation and reinterpretation of the disciplinary rules, depending on different environment, geographical condition. Austerities and ritualism can be considered as another reason. So austerities is normally prohibited by the Buddha, right? This is considered as one of the two extremes in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. But then we find the idea of Dhutavada or Dhutanga, right? Some people who take up extreme practice, right? So one of the great example is Mahakassapa. And ritualism. So ritual practices are also not very much encouraged in the time of the Buddha. So, but later on, it became popular and there were people who were fond of these ritualistic practices and so on. So this could be considered as some of the causes that led to the arising of different Buddhist schools. We'll go a little more detail into these points. The first one is want of provision for supreme headship for the sasana. So as I have been saying, after the Buddha's passing away, the Buddha said that Dhamma and Vinaya should be regarded as your teacher, right? So he did not stress on the on appointing any particular thera to lead the sangha. Now, we also know that when the Buddha was alive, when Jaina Mahavira, Nigantanatha Buddha passed away, there was problem, conflict and disputes in his followers, among his followers. But then, taking that as an occasion, we find that the Buddha, when he was informed about this incident, he was putting stress on the teaching and the practice rather than a headship of the order. Okay, so we find that he was asking the monks to get together and recite these 37 factors of awakening, right? Buddhipakya Dhamma, and then he is providing explanations with regard to the teacher and the teachings that what could be the causes for the arising of such conflict. If the teaching is really perfect, and if the teacher is perfect, and if the followers are really sincerely following the teachings, there should not be any problems. So it says that once Vasakara, a minister of Ajatasattu, I think in the Magadhan kingdom, asked Ananda that how the sasana will run without a leader. Then Ananda said, Dhamma and Vinaya is to be regarded as their teacher, as the Buddha told him. And when further asked, he said, it is pointed out by the Buddha that those senior and spiritually accomplished monastics should be respected for the benefit of the Sangha. Now, this is, you can find this as one of the 7 principles, Anantariya, not Anantariya, Aparihaniya Dhamma, one of the 7 Aparihaniya Dhamma, right? Aparihaniya Dhamma. So you have this discussion of Aparihaniya Dhamma with regard to Vajji people in Vesali who have been following these 7 principles and leading a good life in Vesali. Following these 7 principles, the Buddha gave the teaching to the monks, and one of this teaching was that as long as you pay respect to the senior monastic members, spiritually accomplished monastic members, the Sangha will be benefited by that. Now, Nalinakshadat thinks that this provided the Sangha to follow their senior-most monk in different localities. And these elders, when teaching and guiding their followers, offered diverse interpretations of the Dhamma and Vinaya so as to continue and benefit this asana. Okay, so I think this is very obvious that when a certain master living in a certain place, he should be giving his own, his explanations of the teaching based on his own understanding. He might be a disciple of the Buddha himself, right? But he would be providing his own understanding of the teaching to his followers. So that is how different interpretations of the teaching came to exist, and those following this different theras probably grouped together and had their own understanding, which could be different from the explanation and understanding of the other monastic members living in other place. Now, in the word of Nalinakshadat, for example, he says this conversation, the conversation between Vasakara and Ananda, where Ananda points out that the senior monks should be respected. That was one of the advice given by the Buddha. And this Nalinakshadat says that this conversation makes it clear that each parish was under the control of the senior most and best qualified monk that the parish could furnish. The bhikkhus residing under his superintendents met together on the Upasata days and held religious discussions among themselves in order to elicit the true meaning of Buddha's word. In the course of their discussions, they interpreted the terse expression of the teacher in different ways and introduced additional materials in the interpretations, passing them in the name of the Buddha to give them stamp of authenticity. This happened in most of the parishes scattered over the whole of northern India. So this is an opinion provided by Narinakshadal. So people who are following a particular teacher, they are influenced by the teaching of that teacher. So this is the another course, grouping of disciples around a noted thera. Now this, as I said, in the time of the Buddha, there were some great theras that the Buddha, praised. The number is 80. Not all of them are theras. They are considered as disciples. So they are monastic members, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis. There are lay disciples as well. They were great for different reasons. You'd see here from the Anguttara Nikaya, where there is a section that discusses about the greatness of different, followers, including monks, nuns, and lay followers. So you would find, these statements like "Etadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang mahapanyana yadidang sariputta." The Buddha is making it clear to the community of monks that among the disciples that I have, Sariputta should be regarded, foremost in terms of having great wisdom. Okay. Yatadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang idimantanang yadidang mahamuggalana. Right? So as far as there is a discussion of psychic power, supernormal power, Mahamoggalana is the foremost among all the disciples. Etadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang dutavadanang yadidang mahakassapa. So this is related to austere practice, extreme, practices in the Buddhist order. So Mahakassapa seems to be the foremost to follow this Dutavada or Dutanga practice. So there are, I think, 13 rules for Dutanga practice. You'd find a detailed discussion of these 13 rules in Visuddhimagga by the end of the Sila section. Etadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang dibbachakkukanang yadidang anuruddha. So Anuruddha is praised for having, dibbachakku, divine eye. Etadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang Dhamma katikanang yadidang punnamantani putta. So punnamantani putta is regarded as foremost, as far as the discussion of Dhamma is concerned. Yatadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkave sankitena bhasitasya vittarena attang vibhajantanam yadidang mahakaccana. Mahakaccana was regarded foremost in the sense that he is able to explain in detail teachings that were given briefly, that were stated briefly, right? Etadagang bhikkave mama savakanang bhikkhunang Sikha Kamanang Yadidang Rahul. So Rahula is praised for having the desire for learning all the time. Yatadagang Bhikkave Mama Savakanang Bhikkунang Bahussutanang Yadidang Ananda. Ananda is praised for being someone who had heard the most. Okay, so Bahussuta also means a learned one. Is also regarded as Dhamma Bandhakarika, treasurer of Dhamma, because he's the one who kept in mind all these teachings. Yatadagang Bhikkave Mama Savakanang Bhikkунang Vinaya Dharanang Yadidang Upali. So Upali is praised for being the foremost in upholding the Vinaya. Yatadagang Bhikkave Mama Savakanang Bhikkунang Aranya Kanang Yadidang Revato Kadira Vani. As a forest dwelling monk, Revato is praised. Yatadagang Bhikkave Mama Savakanang Bhikkунang Jainang Yadidang Kanka Revato. So this is a different Revata there, who is praised for his attainment of jhana samadhi. So now when we look at this, we find that they each of these theras had their own group of monks who have been following them. And so again, Nalinakshada remarks that these distinctions among them did not lie in any differences of doctrines which they professed, but in the degrees of proficiency attained by each in particular directions of Buddhist sadhana. But the divisions, though not proceeding from radical differences in doctrine, grew stereotyped in course of time, and fusion between them later on became an impossibility due to the separatist frame of mind that their existence as separate orders naturally developed. So what he wants to say is that when a certain group of monks following their own teacher, different teacher, focusing on different aspect, right? You can imagine that somebody who is following Ganabosari Putta should be Panyavanta as well, right? And the group of monks following Mahamoggalana would have more focus on the development of the psychic powers, right? And those following Ananda probably would be focusing on memorizing the teachings properly, right? Those following Mahakachana would probably focus on how brief teaching could be expanded, right? Explained in detail, right? So as time went by, Naranaksha remarks that probably people following different teachers would have their own understanding of the teaching, and then they probably later on they are not in a position to really agree on the teachings and the explanations by other members of the Sangha. Now the Chinese pilgrims, monks, they have, when they came to India, they have noted a lot of things that they have recorded in their text. Master Xuanzang, for example, observes that 1000 years later, when he came to India, in his writing he mentioned that the Abhidhammikas that existed in India, they are glorifying Sariputta. Okay, so they are a follower of Sariputta. Now they have been particularly appreciating Sariputta among other masters, And those who are focusing on Vinaya, they are paying respect to Upali Thera. And the Shramaneras paying respect to Rahula. And the Sutraists, those focusing on sutras only, he notes that they are paying their respect to Punnamantani Putta. And those, that are focusing on Samadhi, they are respecting Mahamugallana. The Bhikkhuni Sangha are paying more respect to Ananda Thera. And the Mahayanist, in the time of Master Xuanzang, when he came to India, he saw that the Mahayanists that are living in India at that time were paying respect to Bodhisattva, different Bodhisattvas, for example, Manjushri and so on. Yes. And this Bhanaka tradition was another cause of this rising of different Buddhist schools. We know that different group of monks were given duties of keeping in mind different set of teaching, right? Now, as you can see here, these separate bodies which existed for a particular function necessary for the whole Buddhist community. For example, the preservation of a particular portion of the Pitaka by regular recitations, immediate in course of time, doctrines which could be looked upon as peculiar to the body holding them, and in the way the body developed into a separate religious school of Buddhism. Such instances are found in the Theravadins who had developed into such a school from the Vinayadharas and the Sautrantikas from the Suttantikas. It must not be thought that all the divisions mentioned above in this connection developed into religious schools. But what I mean to point out is the fact that such divisions supplied from among them bodies which in time grew into full-fledged schools. We actually see even in the present day traditional Buddhist countries that there are so many different schools in the Theravadin countries, in Mahayana countries as well. In the Theravadin countries, for example, if you talk about Thailand, there are different, Nikaya, right? Two main Nikayas are called Mahanikaya and Dhammayuttika Nikaya, right? So, yeah. So Dhammayuttika Nikaya came later. So Dhammayuttika Nikaya particularly focused on Vinaya, Vinaya practices and also meditation, I think, particularly, and also study, of course. Whereas Mahanikaya is a larger group, right? And it has been existing since the time of since the time Buddhism came to Thailand. So that is the oldest tradition that is existing. And of course, they are focusing on almost everything. You can find meditation monks even in Mahanikaya tradition. They are studying, they're doing all kinds of social activities and everything, right? And then again, you would find there is a separate, you can say, Nikaya, that is Dhammakaya, right? Vatra Dhammakaya. So they have their own ways of seeing things or interpreting the teaching of the Buddha, and they carry out a different set of activities. And there is another one that is quite popular, that is called Santi Asoka. And this Santi Asoka group, they are a little different from these three, Dhammayut and Dhammayuttika, Dhammayut tradition. And this Santi Asoka group, they focus on, I heard they focus on, Bodhisattva idea, right? And what do you say? engaged Buddhism, right? Engaged Buddhism. So Buddhism at work, right? So they are also, I mean, more or less people from all these different groups, they are studying, they are doing meditation, everything, but they have their specific focus that defines the school, right? In the case of Myanmar also, I think there are different traditions, right? I'm not very sure about that. Yeah. And yeah, so, and in Sri Lanka as well, there are different, Nikayas as well. Sometimes it depends on geographical areas. Sometimes it depends on different masters, right? And I'm sure that in the Mahayana tradition as well, there are different Nikayas, right? Different schools. If you talk about Chan or Pure Land, or I don't know, I don't remember the names of all these schools, but I think they have a specific text, specific focus, right? So that defines the school. And this is another course, elasticity of the rules of disciplines. Now we know that Patimukas have been decided to be recited every fortnight, and this was done in the time of the Buddha. But there were instances of differing disciplinary rules. In some cases, for example, those dwelling in disadvantaged places in the bordering countries, Pachantima Janapada, such as Avanti, etc., with the request of Venerable Kachana and Venerable Punnamanthaniputta, the Buddha allowed them to wear leather-made shoes, etc. Okay, so there was some changes of rules in the case of monks living in these particular places, but it was not allowed in the Majjhima Desa, middle countries. It should be noted that Buddha's primary objective was the liberation of all beings from the cycle of samsara, and thus the stress was given more on the restraints of actions by body and speech and the purification of mind from unwholesome and negative thoughts and ideas. Further, as the Mahaparinibbana Sutta points out, Buddha allowed monks to adjust the minor rules. This opened the door for the changes of Vinaya rules. And we know that the Vajjaputtika bhikkhus came up with their 10 rules, and subsequently the second council took place due to that. So this idea of elasticity of rules of disciplines, depending on geographical condition and other environments, some of the rules could be changed. And due to that, there were differences of opinions. And this could be regarded as another reason. Austerities and Ritualism, I have already mentioned about it earlier. Yeah, so we know that the Buddha did not like extreme ascetic practices, but later on there were some monks who were liking it. So he gave this option to these monks to carry out their practice. In fact, he praised some of the monks who were carrying out these practices. Yeah. Any questions so far?
Teacher, these sorry, these Dhutanga practices are not exactly the same like the ascetic practices that were practiced by the Hindu sannyasins of the time. Isn't it? No, like Buddha did not praise all kind of ascetic practices. Only this particular one, 10, I think 10 Dutangas, they are sitting under a tree and eating from one bowl. They're very specific, no?
Yeah, that's true. Sound is very small. Anyway, so yes, that is true. I mean, it is true, because when you talk about these extreme ascetic practices that the Buddha really neglected, the reason was that they are, one of the reason was they are painful and they do not lead to liberation, right? Whereas in the case of these 13 Dutanga principles, they could be painful as well, but they lead to liberation. And as you say, it is true, the kind of practices that other ascetics have been carrying out as extreme ascetic practices are really different from these 13 rules. But there are, in some cases, there are some similarities as well, taking 1 meal a day. And sometimes if you cannot really get meal, you have to just drink water and so on. And how many chivara you can use, clothing you can use, right? So you have to be very, very particular. You have to be barefoot all the time, and so on. So there are some, some of these practices are really, really difficult.
Yes, thank you, teacher.
Any other question?
Maybe something to add to this question. It's interesting to see that both in these traditions, in Buddhist traditions, and say, for example, Sannyasin traditions, they all speak about guarding oneself from senses.
Yeah, restraining of senses.
Yes, that is an interesting point, I think.
Yes, of course. I think this is a common teaching, right? So if you look at the description of practices in the suttas, this is one of the most important aspect in the practice, right? Sangvara, or restraining of senses. I think there is no argument with regard to this. We find that most of the differences are, especially the minor rules, and of course there are differences of opinions with regard to particular teachings, particular doctrines. Doctrines with regard to, for example, consciousness, and then momentariness of dharmas, and then transmission of karmic force, purification of mind. So there are discussions with regard to all these points only. But yes, as you said, this is a common point, one of the common points, restraining of senses, that everybody is agreeing upon. Okay, I think we can continue with our further discussion on the schools then. Okay, so we know that there was these two schools, Taviravada and Mahasangika, and then all the other schools came to exist from these two. So according to Theravada sources, there are 18 schools, right? 5 from Mahasangika, 11 from Staviravada. So including Mahasangika and Staviravada, 18 altogether. Each school is said to have their own text, especially Abhidhamma text because the Sutta and Vinaya seem to be common to all. But of course, when we talk about Tipitaka and different suttas or different texts, especially belonging to Kuddaka Nikaya, there are schools that did not agree to all the text. Okay, so there are differences in that regard as well. But only two collections of Abhidharma literature survived. One belonging to the Theravada tradition, which was popular in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, and the other belonging to Sarvastivada school that became popular in the North India and Central Asia. In the two classes of text, Kathavattu, that is belonging to Theravada Abhidharma literature, and Vijayanakaya, containing Vijayanakaya belong to Sarvastivada Abhidharma, containing discussions of views of other schools. So even though we talk about different number of schools, and we talk about the existing text of each of these schools, they are non-existent now. Okay, we just find mentioning of these schools, and there are some of their ideas in this text. And later on, we find that these 18 schools are subsumed under these four main schools: Mahasangika, Sthavira, Mula Sarvastivada, and Sammitya. Okay. So as far as Sthaviravada is concerned, it was quite popular in the southern India and in Sri Lanka, whereas Sarvastivada was popular in Central Asia, Gandhara, in that area. Mahasangikas were also, there, and in the, what do you call, Majjhima Desa, that is Rajagaha area, but as I mentioned earlier, not a particular school was really very strong in a particular place, okay, except for the case of Mula Sarvastivada, that was really strong in Gandhara and that area. The same thing goes with Sammitya. It was also, everywhere. Generally, none of these schools are everywhere throughout the Greater India, and no particular area was exclusive domain of any one school. Okay. Certain sects or schools were in the majority in some places, in the minority in others, and completely absent in still other places. Most schools coexisted in varying proportions with other sects wherever they were found. As pointed out by Arindam, for example, in a number of places, especially those that history were important places of pilgrimage, the monks of various sects lived together in neighboring monasteries and often venerated the same sacred objects, stupas, bodhi trees, and others. This was the case not only in the holy places in the Ganges basin, where the major events in the Buddha's life occurred, but also far from there in Sanchi, Karli, Amaravati, Nagarjuna, Kunda, and elsewhere. So in a way, they have been all living together, even though they are having differences of opinions with regard to Dhamma and Vinaya. And there were a lot of common practices, a lot of teachings that they all believed in. This is from, again, Chinese pilgrim monks and scholars in the 7th century CE. As they have seen it, they say the Sammityas, more than 65,000 monks in about 1,000 monasteries were present, above all in Malava, Balavi, on the lower Indus and lower Ganges. And they were also found dispersed in all of Madhya Desha, all in all in the region between the lower Indus and the lower Ganges predominantly in the West. That is Sammitya. Sarvastivadins, more than 16,000 monks. I don't know how they have really counted these numbers. In more than 500 monasteries were especially numerous at Kachgar, Akso, Kocha, thus in Central Asia, but were also found in the north of Afghanistan, scattered throughout Madhya Desha, on the lower Ganges, spreading out towards the northeast and southeast, starting from the center in the extreme northwest of India. Staviras, more than 20,000 monks in more than 200 monasteries, were very numerous in the Dravida land and in Ceylon, that is in Sri Lanka, and were well represented at Samatata and Surashtra. Their main home being southern India, their secondary homes being the mouth of the Ganges and of the Narvada, the two gates through which pilgrims to Magadha passed. The Mahasangikas almost entirely disappeared. 1,000 monks in 20 monasteries were still represented in Kashmir and the northwest of Afghanistan, and on the lower Krishna, their last important stronghold. The adepts of the Mahayana, more than 70,000 monks in more than 1,000 monasteries, were particularly numerous in Kapisha, Magadha, Odisha, Mahakoshala in the east of Afghanistan and Khotan. But they were found also in the extreme northwest of India, scattered in the Madhya Desha, on the lower Ganges, the middle Indus, and at Yarkand, having their main stronghold in the northeast of Afghanistan, and especially the group Magadha, Odisha, Mahakosala. So what is clear from this explanation is that these are the schools that have been surviving for a longer period of time. Sammitya, Sarvastivada, Stavira, Mahasangika, and Mahayana came later. So yeah, you can find the spreading of these schools all over India. This was the place for Staviras. This was the place for Sarvastivadins and Mahayana. Yes, so there was this 4 major schools that survived. One of them is Stavira Vada, and the other is Sarvastivada or Mula Sarvastivada. Then Sammitya and Mahasangika. So among all these schools, later on we find that only the Stavira Vada, that was quite strong in Sri Lanka and in South India, and Mula Sarvastivada in North India, Central Asia, Gandhara, Kashmir, that area. So all the other schools, there were probably some schools that were existing, but they were not that strong. For example, when we talk about Sarvastivada, we find that there was a school that is called Sautrantika, right? So, and it was not in a way completely separate from Sarvastivada. It was still in the Sarvastivada group, but the only thing is that they were more, inclined to sutras rather than abhidharmas. Okay, and therefore they are regarded as Sautrantika, those who regard sutras as their main, authority. Yes, so I think I'll be probably discussing about these 4 schools later on. I think that this is enough for today. And if you have any question, you can raise with regard to today's discussion or with regard to the course in general.
Teacher, do you have any suggestions about the essays that we sent you last week?
I did not really go through all the essays. I have quickly gone through some of the essays. Yes, of course, I think some of you have written really good essays. That is quite, pleasing. But in some cases, I found some problems as well. I'll get back to you on this, essays. Or if you really want to know about your essay, probably you can personally, contact me. You can write me an email. Otherwise, I would be focusing on some other things, and then probably I would be forgetting. So.
Thank you.
There is just one thing I want to mention is that it was supposed to be a short essay, right? But I found that some of you have written a long essay instead of a short one. That is also quite interesting. Seems like you have a lot of things to say. So yeah, but that's okay. But I think when it is said to be a short essay, you have to try every way to make it short, so you need to decide what are the information that you want to include in your essay. What do you think to be most appropriate or necessary, right? This is one problem that we face normally when we write essays or research papers, because you go through a lot of documents and then you collect information and then you want to put all of them together. You do not want to, give up any information. So you generate a kind of attachment toward all the information that you have collected. I hope everyone who is participating today's class have submitted the short essays. Anyone who has not yet submit?
Yes,
I have
Professor.
not submitted, teacher.
Okay.
I will submit soon.
I would be expecting your
Me too, sir.
essay.
I'll submit maybe tonight.
Okay, good. Okay, so if there is no other question or remark, I think we can end our class here, right? Okay, then see you next week. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Someone is saying something.
My answer paper that I sent, to your email before I sent.
I have.
Have you got my paper?
If you have sent your essay, I think I should get it. I mean, I reply normally. Did you receive my reply? Okay, I will check it again.
Okay, teacher.
Okay, then. See you next week. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye. Yeah, thank you.